So today I will be going over free speech and the First Amendment and limits to free speech and the Supreme Court cases that led to these limits. So just to start off, this is the First Amendment as it's written in the United States Bill of Rights. It just gives like a very basic overview of our rights, saying that we have freedom of speech, press, assembly, and petition. And it doesn't mention any of the limitations on there, so I will be going over all of the limitations on the First Amendment. And if you would like a summary on this, the Crash Course episode 25 has a great little summary on everything that has to do with freedom of speech. I will be going over specific cases, and I think they mentioned one or two on there. But basically, it's important to note that the First Amendment only protects you from legal action from the government against your speech, so that doesn't mean that you're safe from your employer. So a great local example would be South Park Susan. So in a viral Twitter video, you can see her communicating threats to two black women, and she basically just goes on a racist rant, and it just was viral. It started off on Twitter, but it made its way towards Facebook, so really everyone saw it, and including her employer, so she was fired from her job at Spectrum. So you can be fired from a private business for your speech, and there's really nothing that you can do to take any legal action against that. They also mention how political speech is given a preferred position, meaning that it's the most protected type of speech. But yeah, just basically it's an entire overview on freedom of speech, and if you would like just a small little summary on that, that's a great video to view. So to start off with one of the first limitations on free speech, advocacy of illegal action. So this has to do with Brandenburg versus Ohio. Just a little bit of backstory on that. Clarence Brandenburg led a Ku Klux Klan rally and invited a news station to cover this rally. And they basically captured Klansmen in cloaks and hoods. Some of them were carrying guns and many were shouting racial slurs. And Brandenburg ended the rally with a speech which was also captured and aired on TV. He said, and I quote, "If the President, our Congress, our Supreme Court continues to suppress the white Caucasian race, it's possible that there might have to be some revengeance taken." And Brandenburg was arrested and charged with breaking the Ohio Criminal Syndicalism Act. And that act basically just says that it's illegal to promote violence as a means for political and social change. And he was found guilty and charged for that. And he was also fined $1,000 and sentenced to 1 to 10 years in prison. He argued that he was protected under the First and Fourth Amendments, and he contacted the American Civil Liberties Union, also known as the ACLU, for help. So he went to the appeals and then the Supreme Court of Ohio, and he found out that he wasn't protected. So then he decided to keep going and went up to the Supreme Court of the United States. And in a 9-0 unanimous decision, it ruled in favor of Brandenburg and also led to the creation of the Brandenburg test. It relies on two parts in order to convict the speaker. So firstly, the speaker must be inciting or producing imminent lawless action. And second, the speaker must be likely to incite or produce such action. So basically, both need to happen in order for the speaker to be convicted of this. And Brandenburg was obviously found not guilty of this. So the second thing that isn't protected under the First Amendment would be fighting words. So Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire, some background on that as well. He was a Jehovah's Witness and he was distributing pamphlets, and he was convicted for calling a state marshal a goddamn racketeer and a damn fascist. So again, in a unanimous decision, they decided that Chaplinsky was found guilty of this, and that the First Amendment would not protect words or phrases if their very utterance inflict injury or tend to incite an immediate breach of the peace. And though it's still in place today, this exemption is almost never used. So commercial speech, that has to do with Central Hudson Gas and Electric versus Public Service Commission of New York. So basically what it is that it protects citizens from propaganda in media and the manipulation allowed to exist, and it protects citizens from being deceived. So in the case itself, it had to do with promoting advertising for electricity use, and it made the distinction between promotional advertising and informational advertising, and this was an 8-to-1 opinion which overruled the Court of Appeals in New York and protected commercial speech from unwarranted governmental regulation. So in this, Central Hudson and Gas was protected and it ruled in their favor. However, the new precedent for this set a standard as to what propaganda and media manipulation is allowed to happen. So obscenity, that's where it gets a little bit more obscure, I suppose, because obscenity varies from state to state. So what's found to be obscene in one state can differ from another state. But on the federal level, we currently use Miller versus California. There have been previous cases which we have used a different standard as to deciding what obscene meant on a federal standard. But some basic overview on Miller versus California. Marvin Miller was the owner of a pornographic mail order business, and someone received this pornographic content and found it offensive and called the police. So Miller was charged with the California Penal Code 311, Section 2A, and basically what that is anyone who is knowingly distributing obscene materials is subject to a misdemeanor, and he was found guilty of this. So when it went up to the Supreme Court, there was really no consensus on what obscenity was, and this founded the Miller test. So we currently use the Miller test. It's a 3-part test to determine what is seen, what is deemed to be obscene in federal and state court. So that is what we currently use, and it was a 5-4 decision. So clearly, the Supreme Court justices, it was a very close decision. So down to the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers, the one that I'll be mentioning is Federalist number 10. It was written by James Madison, and it discusses the dangers of factions. So while Madison was strongly opposed to factions, he realized that abolishing factions was just something that wouldn't be able to take place in American society without abolishing freedom along with it. So in Federalist number 10, he basically just talks about tyranny of the masses and the way that our republic can function if we were to enact the Constitution. So, I mean, that's basically what the Federalist Papers were. There was many, many essays. It was 85 essays to be specific of basically just support for the Constitution and why we should ratify the Constitution. And this essay just really deals with factions and the abolishment of factions. So I thought that it was a great tie-in to the First Amendment because I believe that, you know, with the limits and such, that if we were to limit it too far, then really how much of our freedom are we giving up? And I feel like if we continue to limit our speech more than we have already limited it as it is, as James Madison said, it would be a remedy that is far worse than the disease. I think that the limitations that have been set forth for free speech already currently protect the American citizens, and it protects them against violence. And I think any future limitations on free speech would just kind of turn the First Amendment on its head, and it wouldn't really be more so about freedom of speech. It would just be limiting speech. So basically, that's just an overview of all the limitations that are presented on free speech, and really a small portion of what the First Amendment is about. But at the same time, it's also very necessary to understand what limitations we do have and what we can be persecuted under by the federal government for our speech.